Well, this is a first in the Client Conversations podcast. Mark Koulogeorge and I are sitting in K&L Gates' Dallas office, doing this in person. I've done one other in person, but it was only by audio. And Mark and I have been brave enough to do this in person by video in the office in Dallas because we're here together for a fun event that we're going to have tonight. Mark Koulogeorge is the managing general partner of MK Capital. He has served on over 20 technology company boards and deploys capital for his investors in a number of ways in the VC capital space. He is returned over $400 or $500 million to his investors. It's an incredible track record. He started at Booz Allen, worked with Zell, went to First Analysis, and then started MK Capital. But more importantly, Mark is just one of the best people on the planet. And I don't say that with hyperbole. We've known each other for 40 years. We were college roommates. I've seen Mark in difficult situations, and he's the person you can point to who says he remains unflappable and has incredible equanimity. He has the most beautiful family. I may like his wife even better. I certainly like his oldest daughter, the best of all. But it's a great family. It's a wonderful family. It is a friendship that has enriched my wife and my life very, very much. It is an honor to have you on the podcast, Mark. I want to hear about all sorts of things because you've done so many different things and how you approach investing, how you approach life philosophies, former mentors, but we'll just jump into it.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit. I mean, I obviously know a lot about your family, but talk a little bit about your upbringing, because I think it's somewhat unique and I think it instructs how you've approached life.
Yeah, I'm very much the son of Greek immigrants, kind of that classic immigrant story. My father was a Depression era child. Mm-hmm. Literally, you would tell stories about his dad came back, lost his job, and he asked, "How are we gonna eat?" Right. So that kind of stuff. I like to say we were very typical middle-class family, but we thought we were in the Depression because it had such a searing impact on my father that he used to say it's going to come back. It was a very harrowing experience for him. Mm-hmm. And that kind of impacted us and kind of, I think, made the children really kind of hardworking, and a little bit of fear can be quite a motivator.
Yeah, you didn't take anything for granted.
And not taking anything for granted.
In fact, I mean, let's just start with some failures. I mean, you were really wanted to be a great athlete in high school,
sure,
but ended up being a great debater, right?
Like a lot of people who do things outside of athletics, I was a frustrated athlete. I had my first 2 years of Little League. I didn't get a hit. I remember the last game, my second year, I grounded out to third.
Yeah,
and it was a victory. I was super excited.
So how did you make your way? You went to Glenbrook South. How did you make your way to debate? What attracted you to debate?
I tried out for the freshman basketball team. Mm-hmm. And after the first day, I realized this is not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I looked for other stuff to do and kind of followed someone who I was thought about maybe asking homecoming to a particular meeting. And, the rest is history.
And what did you like about it?
I liked the kids. They were a little bit more, intellectual, a little bit more thoughtful. I liked competition. And I like the ability to win in a discrete time period. I thought it had a lot of the elements that you have when you play chess. I played a little bit of that. And other board games. We were kind of a big board game family, a big board game community, played Risk and Landslide and all those games kind of growing up. I liked the fact that there was winners and losers and consequences. And I loved the competition, the engagement.
Yeah. Yeah. And what today, as you sit here, over 40 years from when you debated in high school, certainly, what do you think stuck with you? What are some of the skills that debate taught you?
Competition of ideas should rule, mm-hmm. Right? And you have to have a profound appreciation for both sides of the story in order to get to the truth, right? Once you take your paradigm, we do this in our investment committee, which is this is not an argumentative forum, right? It's a truth-seeking process. And we're going to use the format of rigorous intellectual debate in order to get to the truth.
I mean, it is one of many things I think is particularly special about you, knowing you as well as I do, that you have taken a bit of the ego out of that conversation. How do you get how do you get people to detach from their ideas so there's this idea meritocracy in the room?
Well, in our firm, we do a lot of it by making people write their own checks. And there's nothing like the fear of losing your own money to bring clarity to a situation. We're big believers in skin of the game. In fact, I've seen Talib wrote a book, Skin of the Game, which I hardly recommend and buy for people because there's something about that ownership, both because you make the public commitment. I think this is going to work, and because you feel the pain. And pain is not, I think maybe our society has gotten to a point where we're always trying to protect from pain. Pain has a very constructive role.
Amen. No, that's well said. So all the debaters, that we know, a lot of them went into law, but you didn't. I mean, I remember you were into economics, you were into the strategy around investing, how investing could do good.
My dad was an accountant growing up, and he loved investing. We would watch in Chicago. There was a show that was the predecessor to CNBC, which is basically a boring white male reading stock prices. And he would have that on. It was on one of the UHF stations, and that would be on at home. And he brought home the Wall Street Journal, and he would bring home to me this thing called the Zweig forecast. Marty Zweig, a very early market prognosticator of the 70s, and he had a phone number that you would call in. Right, this is like the version of sports phone for stock junkies, telling what's going on. I remember I can hear him. I could be on the phone and hear him saying, "Don't fight the Fed," giving these little axioms. So I grew up in that. My dad also had a small investment club. They bought real estate properties. So that was very much in the water. And I remember him coming home one day and saying, "Oh my God," I couldn't believe how much money, he was at Allstate Insurance Company, how much they made on Federal Express. And he said this to me then. He said it to me many times, which is, my gosh, it's great. You only need to kind of get lucky once. You don't need to make it once. And so at Allstate, where he worked, was one of the real pioneers in venture capital. If you go back to the history of the venture capital industry, insurance companies, because they had long dated liabilities, were the best sources of capital for venture capital, which is long dated assets.
That's interesting. I didn't know that history. I always thought that the oil and gas industry spawned some of the private equity because they had to diversify their investments once they amassed all this wealth. But I had no idea insurance companies were.
Yes. You go back far enough, 70s, 80s, that's the case.
Interesting. And so can you tell the folks listening who Sam Zell was? Obviously, our generation would know who Sam Zell. But talk a little bit about that, and how did that experience impact your future?
There was a lot. I mean, in the 80s, you have Milken and Drexel kind of bringing finance available to guys like, Ted Turner and other people doing more public deals, and they could, for the first time, buy these public companies, take portions of them, break them up, restructure them. And you couldn't do that in post-war America up into the 80s because there's just no access to capital. Traditional banks weren't going to give a financial entrepreneur the opportunity to buy a company and to split it up and restructure and make it work. So Sam Zell, who was affectionately known as the grave dancer at that time in the 80s, was a real estate entrepreneur who, at the time I joined him in the late 80s, was looking to diversify into buying manufacturing assets and doing things in other areas beyond real estate. And he's a very creative and wonderful, brilliant guy, wonderful deal maker. I was brought in to work with his now late partner, Bob Lurie. And unfortunately, within the first 9 months, he got cancer and then passed. And then we had a recession. I spent a lot of my career not just buying sexy things, but kind of trying to fix the stuff that was bought. But it was a wonderful environment. He'd walk into the office and say, "Are you having fun today?" And, he had a bunch of very pithy slogans that kind of got you to think different. We were one of the early companies we didn't wear suits. The kind of thought that, hey, we don't want things that hide who you are, your suit and your tie. Show up, let me see what you have, and get to work.
Yeah, I like that. And what would you say his superpower was? Did he have one strength that kind of dominated the others that made?
Yeah, I would say contrarian thinking would be far and away. And then second, creative deal making. He was willing to use every particular angle.
Interesting. Yeah, because we talked about this last night, but I was on a podcast with Jeremy Utley from the Stanford D School, who talks about the concept of idea flow. He wrote a book called Idea Flow with his partner. And The concept being everybody self-edits and only comes up with one or two ideas, but you really need to try to force yourself to come up with 100 ideas, that quantity of ideas. How does that strike you, that philosophy, based on what you know, both that you learned with Zell?
Yeah, look, it's why in the venture business, you got to look at a lot of deals. You can't, there is a bottom up organically trying to see things and talk to people, where if you come in at academically top down and say, oh, I want to invest in the intersection of AI and crypto, there may not be anything there. There may be something there, but you can't invest in it, right? There's so much intelligence, so much creativity, so much genius in the world that you can't plan to run into it, right?
Yes.
You got to put yourself into situations where you get exposed to more, and that's positive. That's why you want to have diverse teams with different backgrounds and different geographies in order to cultivate that thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's why I did this podcast, really, because it kind of bumps you into thinking that isn't in your normal glide path. And
we get so comfortable in our glide path.
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. Why technology? Why did you focus on that?
I originally was looking at doing things in more traditional kind of industrial kind of buyouts. And I had a deal that I worked on for 9 months. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, the management team shopped the deal to someone else and lost it. And that it kind of got me from buyouts, where I kind of viewed the capital as more of a commodity, to looking at venture, where you really could build as an individual professional and as a firm competitive advantage because you knew certain areas better. And there's some analogies to insurance, that you can underwrite the risk. You can understand the risk associated and the opportunity much better than you could in traditional fields. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have as much money when we started out the firm, right? So it was a way to get more leverage on my capital. I was going to sell more insight and expertise in addition to the capital, as opposed to saying, hey, we're going to buy a packaging firm,
right?
Which just required a bunch of capital.
So there had to be a moment or moments where, you're the son of an accountant who worked at an insurance company who was constantly worried about the downside risk, right? He'd been through the Depression. So you had to go from a certain school of thinking into putting your money, I'm sure, high percentage of your wealth at risk. How did you get over the fear?
When you start off with nothing, what did Bob Dylan say? When you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So I've always felt that the trappings necessarily very important to me anyway. Yeah. And I just get more emotional pleasure walking into one of our businesses that's grown and has success, and like, hey, there are, X hundred people here who have jobs and who are feeding families because we invested in this company and it was literally nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And now we're having this big impact. And I just get more pleasure out of that.
Yeah. So you've mentored, hundreds of people, including me, by the way. Talk about who, you've talked about your dad a little bit, but other than your dad and maybe a Sam Zell type, who have been your mentors? Are there stories that you learned from them that have stuck with you?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that the best mentor is a pastiche of all the different people you've kind of worked with, right? So it's a composite. And, that's the beautiful thing about our industry, because you invest in multiple companies and you sit on multiple boards and you get to pick and choose.
Yeah.
And there are some you got to also know yourself in terms of being a charismatic leader. But I worked for this guy in the Zell organization, Bill Hall, who used to just tell me to do the right thing. Yeah. Something which was to me a reminder of sometimes these, especially younger professionals with their very impressive degrees and pedigrees, they make things too complicated, right? And simplify is one of the mantras kind of in our shop.
Give me some more quadrants of that pastiche.
There's a lot there. I was very deeply influenced in our family. We were very active in the church. My dad was one of the founders of the church. And, our first parish priest, this guy, Reverend George Koulogeorge, had a big impact on me in terms of, he was solid and dependable, and you went every Sunday and you knew what you were going to get. So I try to be, for my organization, for my companies, I try to be a rock of stability.
Yeah.
Because there's so much crisis they deal with, so much uncertainty, lack of funding, funding risk. We just have had this bank crisis in the last 2 or 3 weeks where I'm getting these calls, and someone needs to, at a minimum, demonstrate stability and consistency. So I try to be that for our other professionals, and more importantly, for my portfolio company CEOs and those management teams.
Yeah, I love that you get that from a religious leader. That's a fascinating part of it. What do you do with it? You know, you get this stress. It's not like you don't feel the stress. You know, you see it collapse like SVP. It's in the tech space. It's going to impact a lot of your company. Like
it is right now, right? We have bank lines and they can't perform on it, or Signature Bank can't perform on it, right? So it's really important that my CEOs, I had this discussion the other day, they understand we have their back.
Yeah.
Right. Just taking out some of that fear for them is very empowering.
And what's your personal trick? I mean, a lot of people who are listening to this kind of are those young professionals with pressure and they feel the pressure. What's your trick to find the equanimity to kind of be the stability, the rock, the person who isn't?
Yeah, but some of it is a worldview.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I've been doing this for close to 30 years.
Yeah.
And we've had financial crises, we've had pandemics, we've had terrorist attacks. And the truth of the matter is the upward trajectory of the United States and of mankind as a whole it looks inexorable to me. And as many problems we have as a society, socially, politically, fiscally, you know, technology builds on itself. And that's one of the great things that I've been attracted to technology as an investor, which is the power to transform so much. And it's always additive.
Yeah.
Right. We never go back.
Yeah.
Right. And so the truth of the matter is I like to say, I've lost money in every conceivable way possible. We've had financial frauds. We've had incompetent leaders that we've missed. I mean, you know, when you've had all those failures, and the venture capital business model is a lot about failure.
Yeah.
Right. And the ability to overcome failure in order to live to fight again another day.
Yeah.
Extend your duration so you have more opportunity to win. And some people say get lucky.
Yeah.
Because being in the right place in the right time is a large part of what this business is about.
So I want to follow up on failures. What are some lessons learned from the experiences you just outlined? I mean, whether it's those or others, but I mean, I think part of what makes you a special human being is that you do take challenges and failures as a gift. So any examples that you could share that you say, gosh, I missed that. You know, how did I miss that? But next time I'm not going to miss that.
Oh yeah, my gosh. It's well, look, sometimes one thing you got to be mindful of is you can't be so outcome. You got to learn from the outcome, but sometimes the outcome is not evidence of a flawed process. Right. So one of the first investments I made was in a recycled pulp mill.
Yeah. And
it was, because of my Zell's heritage, exquisitely structured, where we had a small strip of equity, and we had some, you know, attractive mezzanine debt. And then we had some project finance that was really very cheap. And we built this facility in Pennsylvania. We had these contracts with different recycled groups that were going to send us waste material. And we just hit the 94 recession. And, you know, we looked at that deal, and actually when we did the postmortem, the risk reward was still pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But shit happens.
Yeah.
And you can't control it all. And what you needed to control, what we did control in that deal, is we made sure we only lost $6 million. Mm-hmm. And unlike the bondholders, right, we didn't lose $60 million. And so, you know, was there enough leverage in the capital structure for us? That's something that's, you know, important, understanding where the real operating leverage is, where the financial leverage is in the business. And that, because that was early in my career, that had a very searing experience and got me to rethink, what do we do wrong? I'd say the other thing that we try to do is build the anti-investment case at the same time you build the investment case. Mm-hmm. So have a very explicit discussion, not just with your partners, but with your executives. If this doesn't work, tell me why it's not going to work.
Right.
How do we anticipate those issues? How do we make sure we recognize those issues and get in front of those issues?
That's awesome. I mean, that's some of what lawyers do, I think. You know, lawyers today have tried to get more into the business. It used to be table stakes of being a lawyer was being a good lawyer.
Right. Now you're counselors and advisors.
Yeah, you're in the business. I think lawyers quickly figured out they couldn't be good counselors and advisors if they didn't understand a business model. and we're proud of the fact you've used K&L Gates before in your companies and to represent you. You've used, one of our closest friends frequently. Talk a little bit about how you think about using lawyers. What are qualities of really good, effective lawyers? And if a young lawyer is listening to this, what would you give them as advice from a client, about how to be a better lawyer?
Yeah, I would say a really good counselor is going to tell you what you don't want to hear. Right. And so they've got to be sensitive, particularly in a negotiating dynamic. Someone's got to be honest with you on how you're coming off, how things are perceived. Right. You can't be such a staunch advocate that you put your head in the sand and don't hear both sides of the conversation. Right. Now, that doesn't mean I want you to advocate for the opposing side. But in our business, especially when we're looking at making investments as opposed to selling companies, the contract is the start of a relationship. We like to say you can never out-negotiate your business partner. It's axiomatically impossible. Once you've done that, you failed. Right? So it's like, how do you make sure there's an understanding of what really our objective is, how we get what we do with them, but use that as a first step to build a relationship, not to let people feel embittered and demotivated and untrusted, right? Because you can't build anything if that's the way it goes.
Yeah. No, there's not going to be any trust there.
Correct. And look, we work in industries, right? We're not building buildings. We're not drilling oil wells. 80% of the cost is people.
Yeah.
If they don't trust you, they're not going to be creative. They're not going to be productive. It's not going to work.
Yeah. Your motives aren't aligned.
Yeah. So we intentionally do a lot of stuff to make sure that's another thing, make sure you leave some crumbs on the table. Don't win every negotiation, right? Because you don't want someone looking back, even if you win that day. Yeah. You've got smart, motivated, ambitious people who are going to look back and are like, I don't feel good about that 6 months later. And you never want that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. How about on the Sam Zell Gravedigger? How about on the litigation side or the failed deal?
I would say, like, on the contract side, what's really valuable for lawyers is to sit with us early and understand if things went wrong, how would we behave? So, for example, in standard contractual representations, we're big believers of, we don't want the right to sue our company.
Right.
That's not a good remedy. Right. But having provisions that automatically adjust the valuation or change when something is redeemable, that's a good remedy. Right. There are times where, they don't even know, but yes, the contract, we thought we were investing in one company and it didn't quite have what it said it had. And so you do need to have contractual provisions, and you need to have people who understand that without contracts, there is no civil society.
Yeah.
And people have to do what they need to do. And we do, push comes to shove in a situation like that. We try to be reasonable, but we expect contracts to be enforced.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. For the litigators to understand, to begin with the end in mind as well, to understand that if a litigator is deployed, it's got to be done consistent with the principles of your investment strategy.
Yeah, I think for especially business people who really are in their own and deal people, private equity venture, they kind of live in a cocoon. Mm-hmm. It's very enlightening to sit in front of kind of a mock jury.
Yeah.
And see how they respond to you, or go through the exercise of sit on the other side of the glass wall and have them discuss what they think about your case.
Yeah.
And it can be a little scary, but we are not sympathetic defendants. There are people in the world who have real problems, and civil disputes amongst venture capital and private equity and tech entrepreneurs aren't high on the list of most people's concerns.
Yeah.
So have a little bit of humility in terms of how the world's going to look at you, and, try to settle that.
It's interesting. You and I know each other so well, and this will get a little more personal. We've had our personal life challenges, right? Sure. And you've spoken publicly about the fact that has it been a decade since you were diagnosed with prostate cancer? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Talk a little bit about, mortality and how you approached solving the problem of your diagnosis, which you've done in a way incredible discipline. Would you be willing to share some of that?
Yeah, I mean, and look, for people who, listen, and I think that, part of my mission post my diagnosis with prostate cancer is, hey, I'm going to help other men once they're diagnosed to talk about, okay, what's going on. Not that I'm a medical professional, but there is a set of decisions you need to make that are medical and non-medical about how you want to handle disease when it's encountered. And what I found in my navigating the medical system is, you can be a great surgeon, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're a great decision support person. And a lot of this is, how do you make good decisions that are aligned with your values and aligned with the data?
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to just become kind of a number. But I had just come off of a very great year where we sold our marketing automation company, Primo, for $500 million or more. And my beloved Packers won the World Series. And one of my partners, Super Bowl. Sorry. Yeah. We're closer to winning the World Series now. They don't have a quarterback. Yeah. I went to my doctor, and I was 47. The guideline was 50. And he's like, this PSA is a little bit high. It's not going to be a big deal. Let's take another PSA test. And he said, it's not going to be a deal. Let's do a biopsy. And, it's like going to the craps table and snake eyes, right? Which is scary.
Yeah.
And humbling. Things kind of going well for you professionally and personally. It's like you start to forget how fragile our hold of life is.
Yeah.
And at any time it can be taken away, literally the next day. Right. So for me, at that young age, my dad had prostate cancer in his 80s, and they told him, you'll die of something else. And they gave him seed treatment. And, that was a different deal. You kind of expect that.
Yeah.
You don't expect cancer in the 40s in a family that has no history. You don't expect the biopsy to come back positive. You don't expect the cancer surgery to come back and they say, we don't think we got it all. So it's just it's a wake up call. And there's nothing like cancer to clarify, okay, let's understand who you are and what you want to be and what's important, because you don't know how many years you have left on the shot clock.
Yeah. It's interesting just from observing you, I would have looked at you at 47 and said you didn't need much more clarity. Like you had it. You've always been an old soul to me, and maybe because of the origins of, who you looked up to and how you thought about things. But it just showed that there is further clarity. Like,
yes,
it's like, as far as
that's exactly right.
Gotten, we can continue to grow and learn and appreciate what we have
and reprioritize.
Right.
And decide really what you want your impact to be for this very small time we have on this planet.
Yeah. And why did you choose, you were a pretty private guy. I mean, maybe not to your closest friends, but you're a pretty private guy.
Mm-hmm.
You've been so open about it. You've talked about it.
It's very lonely. I mean, I used to get up in order to work, I'd get up at 5 something. I'd drive down to the south side of Chicago for University of Chicago for my treatment. And you'd be in a room with other guys who are getting their radiation. And it's a bond of brothers, but these are people you have nothing in common with. Some of them don't speak your language, and it's really lonely.
Yeah.
I mean, you're never more alone than when you have that kind of fear.
Yeah.
And so I just didn't want other people to be so alone, fundamentally, right? And I think it can help. And I've also seen, the medical and the healthcare world, they have certain practices and formulas, right? And they don't necessarily fit everyone. And I was really blessed because one of my other Dartmouth friends and my sophomore year roommate, Steve Nakata, was the department chair of urology at the University of Wisconsin. So I had someone kind of looking out for me.
Yeah.
Saying, that's the standard care, or that may be the standard approach, but you're 47. You may want to look at this a little bit different because you're trying to live to be 80. I had a doctor, when I was talking about my goals, saying, well, I don't really plan more than 25 years or 30 years because, by the time you're 80, you have dementia, no quality of life. Who would want to live then? And I'm like, excuse me, I raised my hand. Ow.
Yeah.
Right. But you see that people in healthcare and in all fields, they project their values on you as a patient or potentially as a client. Mm-hmm. And you got to be really careful about that and make sure they're being more intentional, more explicit about what your values are and what me as the patient, what's my value.
Right. It gets back to what you said a good lawyer does, a good investor does, right? It's what is your goal? what are you trying to accomplish?
Exactly right.
If the doctor doesn't understand it, they can't treat you any better than anybody else can. That's really well said. And you dove into the research. You really and changed your diet and
Correct. And still, drink my 6 cups of green tea and other high antioxidants. And it's interesting because some people, when they get cancer, and this even happened to a friend of mine who's, a healthcare professional, which is they just emotionally, it's hard. I think the response for some people is they just block it out. They don't want to deal with it. It's hard to deal with it. And they're like, I trust my doctor. I'm going to listen to my doctor. Yeah. I'm, inherently more of a skeptic. And so I was like, hey, commission people. I was reading papers, having other people read papers, understand what's going on in the literature and what's changing and where there are avenues. And there's a whole body of activities in my research where, there's not statistically significant evidence that something works, but it's still more likely than not that it doesn't hurt you and that it can help you. And I think that's true about a lot of things that we can do to build up our immune system and our overall health.
Yeah. I take my athletic greens every day.
It's good.
Yeah.
Turmeric is my new thing.
Turmeric. Yeah, I take turmeric.
I'm gonna start taking turmeric.
Yeah, it's good. Good. It's all in Indian food. Which I happen to like. So that's good too. As a technology investor, I have to ask this question. I mean, you and I haven't prepped at all for this. No, these are completely unfair questions. But I mean, we're all talking about AI. We've talked about crypto, blockchain. What's that technology of the future in 10 years that you're watching to see how it evolves? And if you were to get your crystal ball out, what's something in 10 years they're going to be writing a story about technologically that maybe most people wouldn't anticipate?
We live in such a world of hype. I think it's more we over anticipate the impact of crypto or Web3, and these things do kind of run into cycles. But I think that we are still in the early innings of automation and what I'll call applied AI. Mm-hmm. And we invest in business to business opportunities. So it's a sub-segment, but that plus robotics, I think has the opportunity to dramatically improve productivity for, decades. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's not eliminating individual jobs. It's the software engineer who starts writing something and the generative AI program finishes the program and now they can turn into an editor. Right. You see this in call centers, an area we invest in, where they recommend, here's your next best action. And then they take the next best action. Yeah. Right. And so it's taking all of this stuff that you used to do that was a bit of a burden, and it's automating and allowing you to hopefully focus on the higher value stuff.
Yeah. Synthesizing the data from the issues you're identifying. So, I mean, back to prostate cancer, understanding what are the things I need to be asking as a doctor to pump into something that would spit out maybe a little bit more refined approach.
Yeah, or we've gone through, I think the big data revolution, immensely powerful. Personalizing medicine. We're looking at things right now. We don't do a ton of health. We've done some in home care and there's a really interesting substance abuse business that we're looking at right now where, it's really expensive for people to go 30 days to a clinic and be an inpatient. But the combination of having better data that you can monitor, blood tests, breath tests, letting people who are in remote areas go to their AA meeting in an avatar, in a virtual reality setting, having access to understanding, okay, there's another person we have 18 people who are kind of like you in terms of profile values who fill out the form and the survey similar to you, and here's what works. I mean, there's a ton of possibility and opportunity in these big data applications.
I know you're an optimistic person, but is there anything that scares you? We're talking, obviously there's hype, as you say, around the insidiousness of technology. Our kids are,
social, and the fact that our basis instincts can be played upon for someone's business benefit. I think that what concerns me is kind of complacency.
Yeah.
As technology becomes more and more pervasive and more invasive in our daily lives, there just needs to be more awareness and less complacency. We got to be more active in terms of deciding how we're going to let that interface with us interact with us.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm gonna ask you a few last questions. One is, I know you're a reader, a book or two that you've read, or just a thought leadership piece or something like that, that really has stuck with you. Is there something?
I've read, a little bit of a Civil War buff.
Yeah.
And I've, been to all the battle sites.
Yeah.
And, read a lot of military history and military strategy.
Yeah.
And I think that those leaders, the Grant biography, or you go through them.
The Chernow one.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
What they really help me, and they really can help our CEOs, because I tell the stories, is understanding that, you're going to get foisted into a position of leadership and you're not going to have a choice. Yeah. And you've got to manage your battlefield, your environment. And, that's been very helpful to me, kind of having that kind of strategic. I like to think of the venture world as the intersection of finance and strategy. We try to understand where the world is going. I mean, some of it is a play on technology, and then some of it's a play on where's their opportunity. So it's great that we have a robotics investment. Part of what will make that work or not is, does robotics in hospitals does it matter? Does it work? Is a nurse going to be willing to interact with the robot and say, yep, I'll put the lab sample on that. And I'm going to spend time spending with this patient and feel comfortable that I don't need to run it back, right? So there's that whole human interaction with the technology, which sometimes is the difference between winning and losing.
That's fascinating. And it doesn't surprise me. You and I have never talked about this. I read the Chernow Grant book, I think during COVID or right before COVID. But I was struck because, as a Texan, I didn't have a lot of Texas history, but as a Texan, I would say the South thinks of Grant as like a drunk, and it's like all the lines. And then when you read Chernow, you realize the thing about Grant was his equanimity. It was his ability to be unflappable when, everybody else would be ducking and everything else. And the way it's described, Grant.
Yeah. And the difference to me about Grant versus Lee is his equanimity comes from a deep sense of humility.
Right.
As opposed to a lot of particularly the Southern generals, and a lot of generals from Caesar onward, had huge egos.
Yeah.
And you got to believe in yourself. You got to have some level of ego. But, there's, I think it's Chickamauga, where Grant is thinking about how, he's scared as hell, but he's thinking to himself, if I'm this scared, think of how frightened the other guy is. Right. And so that's kind of an interesting point of humility, as opposed to thinking, well, I'm, undefeatable and my army's impenetrable. Right. That kind of false sense of arrogance. Yeah. That got Custer in some deep trouble. Yeah. So, I think it's important for leaders to have, that's why I think biographies are so important, to sit in the shoes of other leaders. I'm reading Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, right? And just to say, okay, he's trying to run the Roman Emperor, the Roman Empire, right? Like, what's going through his mind? How is he thinking about that? And if I have some of the same thoughts, how can I leverage kind of how he handled things to get to better decisions?
Yeah. I mean, you think about what he had to deal with, and yet he could inspire thousands of years of stoicism. No, that's a good one. I mean, that's a dense one too. You got to kind of put it down every once in a while.
Yeah, I had a lot of long flights, so I can get through a little bit at a time.
Exactly. Is there somebody who we hear about today, or that we see in the news, or we don't see in the news, who you admire? A public figure.
You mean as someone who's a current practitioner?
Yeah.
It's hard. I mean, outside of someone like Zelensky, right, who really steps up and transforms himself. I mean, I am a little bit of a Ukraine news junkie, and we've supported some Ukrainian refugee stuff in Poland, because I just think what you're seeing there cannot get enough attention.
Yeah.
I mean, these people, through no fault of their own, their world's been totally turned upside down. They could have clearly taken the easy way out. And instead, they're defending their homeland, their people, and the rest of us.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm fully a believer that their war is our war.
Yeah.
And you either get these kinds of characters like Putin now, or they get bigger. And it's this complacency. that we see in our society. It's just like, it frightens me.
It doesn't touch us directly somehow.
Yeah, I'm going to just ignore it and put my head in the sand.
Yeah.
And wait until what? Poland's next?
Right.
Right. And it's like, there are consequences. You would hope that our world would learn that, but it's like you're dealing with Lindberghs out there again. People want to take the easy way out.
Yeah. Well,
I also think our political system, statesmanship doesn't get rewarded. And so when you're looking at who makes it to the top, you're almost, solving for a system where the statesman can't get on top. It's much more difficult. I hope that changes, but ultimately it's up to us. We get the government we elect.
Yep.
And it's up to the American people to say, what, character matters. We want people who listen to both sides. It's not about my side just winning or my tribe being on top here. It's about making sure the whole is advanced. And we got to get to that as society. Otherwise, we're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah. All right. Last question. And I want you to pull in, you're a wonderful parent to 3 great children. You're a wonderful spouse. So this can involve more than just the business and the business issues, but what if you were to have a billboard? You could just put a few words on a billboard, but it would be something that people have to look at and think about. What would be on your billboard?
For business, we have a big belief that complexity is the enemy of execution. Mm-hmm. It's like, remember, not just keep it simple, stupid, but remember why we keep it simple.
Right.
Because you can't align people. You can't get folks to do that. But, I would say as it relates to family, and I made a lot of sacrifices building our business, and I try to make up for that now, but, must be present to win.
Yeah.
You never know when someone needs you, whether it's your friend, whether it's your family member. And so, it's so important to stay in touch, and you never know whose life is going to impact yours and where, because of the randomness and the chaos in our world, you can really make a difference in someone else's life.
Yeah. Like you have with 2 of my kids.
Well, it's random. And you with Sarah and with our family, and there's a lot of things that as a parent, they can't listen to you.
Yeah.
Right. They need to maintain their own identity, and that means they push you away.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why it's really important to have other people around them who they know care and who they know are wise, who they can look at and say, you know what, I'm not like my dad because I'm my own independent person, but I'm like Craig Budner. Right. And this is what I can take from them and learn. So again, I think the one thing I've really gotten appreciation for over the last decade or so is it's all about humility.
Yeah.
Right. Without humility, there really is nothing. There's no learning. There's no love. There's no progress. Right. And that's where it all starts.
Yeah.
Right. So I really do. I try to fight back the evil dragons that, whisper in your ear and tell you how great you are. And again, the good thing about the venture industry is we fail enough that I have plenty of reminders I'm not that great.
Yeah.
But I just have to make sure that when we do have a great business and we do get to that intersection of technology and market, that we maximize it. Mm-hmm. Don't exit early.
The last non-history book I finished a couple of weeks ago was The Good Life, that Harvard longitudinal study. Yeah. And it's interesting because it dovetails with everything we've discussed, which is that the number one marker for happy, long life is the connections you make with other people. And our connection was one of the very small number that I thought about as, it just enriches everything. And so it's a good note to end on. Thank you for taking time.
Thank you,
Joel, to do that. And it's kind of a treat.
It's great to be here in person. I think it's a testimony and we've, I think, learned this through the pandemic that, this is important.
Yeah.
Being in person makes a difference. You can't build a relationship in 2 dimensions, and you got to make that a priority and spend the time.
Yeah. Amen.
So that's great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.